Castle Draven stood on a gray cliff above the sea, cold and proud, with towers that scraped the clouds. Inside its walls, life moved in strict order. Lords dined in the hall above. Guards walked the ramparts at night. And far below, past 100 steps of damp stone, something old and forgotten waited in the dark. The servants called it the Beast. No one remembered exactly when it had been locked away, only that it had always been there, as long as anyone living could recall. Stories about it changed, depending on who told them. Some said it was a demon, bound by a holy man. Some said it was a monster the old king had captured in the northern woods. Others said it wasn't a beast at all, but a punishment given to someone who had once been a man. Whatever the truth was, nobody wanted to go near it. The dungeon keeper avoided the lowest cell whenever he could. Guards drew straws to decide who carried down the food each week, and most of them simply left the tray at the top of the stairs, too afraid to walk the rest of the way. That was where Elira came in. She was the youngest kitchen maid in the castle, 17 years old, with quick hands and a quieter heart. She had grown up an orphan in the village below the castle walls, raised by an old woman who sold bread and stories in equal measure. When the woman died, Elira came to Castle Draven looking for work, and work was the one thing the castle never ran out of. She scrubbed pots, carried water, and swept ash from the great hearths. When the other maids refused to bring food down to the beast's cell, the head cook simply looked at Elira and said, "Someone has to, and you're the only one who won't complain about it." So Elira did not complain. Every evening, after the kitchen fires had died down, she filled a wooden tray with bread, meat, and a cup of water, and carried it down the long stone stairs into the dark. The first time she went, her hands shook the whole way down. The air grew colder with every step, and the torches on the walls became fewer and fewer, until only a faint orange light flickered at the bottom. She could hear something breathing before she could see it, slow, heavy breaths, like wind moving through a cave. When she reached the last cell, she saw it. A huge shape crouched in the shadows, larger than any animal she had ever known, covered in dark fur, with eyes that caught the torchlight and glowed faintly gold. It did not move. It did not make a sound. It simply watched her, still as stone. Elira's first instinct was to run. But something about the way it watched her, not hungry, not angry, just tired, so terribly tired, made her stay. She pushed the tray of food through the bars slowly, keeping her eyes on the creature the whole time, and then she backed away and climbed the stairs 2 at a time, her heart pounding. That night, lying in her narrow bed in the servants' quarters, she could not stop thinking about those eyes. They had not looked like a monster's eyes. They had looked like the eyes of someone who had been alone for a very long time. The next evening, she went down again, and the next. Slowly, her fear began to fade into something else. Not comfort, not yet, but a kind of familiarity. The beast never attacked her. It never even came close to the bars. It simply watched from the shadows, silent, as she left its food and turned to go. One evening, without quite meaning to, Elira began to hum. It was an old lullaby, one the bread seller used to sing to her when she was small and could not sleep. She hummed it quietly at first, mostly to calm her own nerves as she walked down the dark stairs, but by the time she reached the last cell, the tune had grown louder, filling the small stone room with sound. She noticed the beast shift, just slightly. Its huge head turned toward her, and for the first time, it did not simply watch, it listened. Elira paused, suddenly shy, but the creature made no move to frighten her, so she finished the song, set down the tray, and left, feeling strangely light as she climbed the stairs. After that, singing became part of her routine. She did not think much of it at first. It was simply something to do to fill the silence, something that made the dark stairs feel less frightening. She sang while she worked in the kitchen, and she carried that habit down into the dungeon without really noticing. Old lullabies, songs about the sea, songs about lost travelers finding their way home. She never expected an answer. She never even expected the beast to care. But it did care, more than she could have imagined. The creature in that cell was not truly a beast at all, though it had almost forgotten that itself. Its name, buried deep beneath layers of fur and silence, was Kale, and once, a very long time ago, he had been a king. the alpha king of the northern wolf packs, a leader loved by his people and respected even by his enemies. He had tried, before the curse took him, to stop a war between two feuding packs, a war that a jealous rival wanted for his own gain. That rival, a sorcerer with a bitter heart, had cursed Chaol instead, twisting him into a monstrous shape and locking him away beneath Castle Draven, far from his home, far from anyone who might recognize him or break the spell. The curse had stripped him of his voice, and, slowly, of his memories. For years, decades, he had existed in a haze of silence, forgetting more of himself with each passing season, until he could barely remember that he had ever been a man at all. He had stopped expecting anything from the world beyond his cell. Servants came and went, dropping food and hurrying away, never once looking at him as anything other than a threat to be avoided. Then, one evening, a girl's voice drifted down the stairs before she even reached the bottom step. Chaol had not heard true singing in 100 years. The sound reached something deep and buried in him, some part of himself he thought the curse had erased completely. He found himself straining to listen, drawn toward the bars despite himself, and when the girl appeared with her tray of food, humming softly under her breath, he felt something in his chest that he did not have a name for anymore. After that first night, he waited for her. Every evening he listened for her footsteps on the stairs, and when her voice reached him before she did, something in him settled, like a held breath finally released. Her songs were simple, imperfect, sometimes off tune, but to Chaol, they were the only beautiful thing left in his world. He could not speak to tell her what she meant to him. He could not explain that her voice was slowly waking pieces of his memory, pulling fragments of his old life back to the surface, flashes of green hills, of a pack that had once called him leader, of a name that was his own. All he could do was listen, and wait, and hope that somehow, without knowing it, she would come again. Weeks passed. Elira noticed small changes in the creature, though she could not explain them. It no longer stayed crouched in the shadows when she arrived. It moved closer to the bars each time, close enough now that she could see the strange intelligence in its golden eyes, something far too aware to belong to a mindless animal. Sometimes, when she sang, it made a low sound in its throat. Not quite a growl, not quite anything she could name. Almost, she thought, though she knew it was foolish, like it was trying to hum along. She began talking to it too, not just singing. She told it about her day, about the arguments in the kitchen, about the storms rolling in from the sea. It never answered, of course, but it always listened, its ears turning toward her voice, its eyes never leaving her face. For the first time since her guardian had died, Elira did not feel entirely alone. One night, during a fierce storm that shook the castle walls, Elira came down later than usual, delayed by extra chores in the kitchen. She found the beast already waiting by the bars, more agitated than she had ever seen it, pacing back and forth in the narrow cell. When it saw her, it went still, and its huge shoulders sagged, as if in relief. Without thinking, without her usual caution, Elira reached out and pressed her palm flat against the cold iron bars. The beast did not flinch away. Instead, it leaned forward and pressed its great head gently against her hand, the way an animal might lean into a trusted touch, though there was nothing purely animal in the way it closed its eyes, as if her hand against its fur was the only warmth it had felt in 100 years. At that moment, something in the dungeon changed. The old curse, woven long ago by a sorcerer, determined to strip Chaol of any comfort, any love, any true connection, had one flaw its maker never expected. It had not accounted for kindness given freely, without any hope of return. Elira had never sung for a reward. She had never touched the bars expecting anything back. She had simply cared, quietly and without condition, for a creature everyone else feared. That kind of care was stronger than any curse. The stone floor beneath them began to tremble. Elira staggered back, startled, as thick chains bolted into the walls for 100 years, groaned, and then shattered, link by link, filling the dungeon with a deafening crash. The beast let out a sound that was part roar, part cry of pain, as its massive form began to shift and twist, fur receding, bones reshaping, until what knelt on the stone floor was no longer a monster at all. It was a man, Tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair and the same striking golden eyes Illyra had come to know so well. He knelt there, breathing hard, looking down at his own hands, as though he had forgotten what they looked like. Illyra froze, unsure whether to be afraid or amazed. Before she could decide, the sound of the chains breaking had already carried up through the castle, and heavy footsteps came pounding down the stairs. Guards burst into the dungeon, swords drawn, expecting to find their prisoner escaping in some terrible new form. Instead, they found their long-lost king. An older guard, one who had served the castle for decades, went pale at the sight of him. "He is the king," the guard whispered, dropping to one knee. "He is Chaol, the Alpha King, taken from us 100 years ago." Confusion spread through the guards, swords wavering, uncertain whether to attack or kneel. Chaol rose slowly to his feet, steadying himself against the bars, and stepped between the soldiers and Illyra without hesitation, shielding her small frame with his much larger one. "She is not to be harmed," he said, his voice rough from 100 years of silence but firm with unmistakable authority. "She is the reason I still stand here today." The guards lowered their weapons, stunned into silence. Chaol turned to Illyra, and for the first time, he spoke directly to her, his voice gentle despite its strength. "You sang to me every night," he said. "You spoke to me when no one else would even look at me. I remembered my name because you gave me a reason to remember it." Illyra, still trying to understand everything happening around her, could only shake her head in disbelief. "I didn't do anything special," she said quietly. "I only sang because the silence frightened me more than you ever did." That, Chaol told her, was exactly why it worked. News of the king's return spread through Castle Draven like wildfire, and then out across the northern lands within days. The kitchen maid who had unknowingly broken a century-old curse became the subject of every whispered conversation in the castle halls. Lords and nobles who had once ignored her now watched her with open curiosity, uncertain how to treat a girl who had accomplished what armies and sorcerers never could. Chaol, however, made his intentions clear from the very first day. He refused to let Illyra return to her old duties in the kitchen. When advisors suggested she be quietly rewarded and sent on her way, he silenced them with a single look. "She stays by my side," he said, "not as a servant, but as my equal. She gave me back everything the curse took, and I do not intend to let that go." In the weeks that followed, as the castle slowly adjusted to having its true king restored, Illyra found herself in a life she never could have imagined. She was no longer the maid who carried scraps down dark stairs, but someone whose quiet kindness had reshaped the future of an entire kingdom. And every evening, as the sun set behind the northern hills, Chaol would find her, and instead of listening from behind iron bars, he would sit beside her and hum the very same lullabies back to her, note for note, exactly as he had memorized them during 100 years of silent, hopeful listening. Illyra never forgot that she had once been simply a girl too poor to be afraid of the dark, and Chaol never forgot that it had taken nothing more than a kind voice, offered without expectation, to bring him back from a century of silence into a life worth living once again.